This a couple different ways, but one, sure. I wanted to find out your relationship with Frank Miller, which is probably what you're best known for in this business.
That will be on my tombstone.
It will be on your tombstone. Hopefully I will not be chiseling that. No. But I'm just curious, like, was that just a random assignment? How did you two meet? How did you become an art team?
Well, the first time that we worked together was obviously on Daredevil, and
this was in the late 70s?
I think that's probably right, or maybe the early 80s, somewhere around there. I mean, Dark Knight was 85, 86, right. So a couple of years before that, probably the early 80s, late 70s, yeah. And I was on Daredevil. That was kind of my book. I mean, Marvel treated that book as it was my book in the sense that they had rotating artists, you know, Carmine Infantino and Gil Kane and Bob Brown and Gene Colan. And my job was, at that time, continuity was valued. Good times. and so, you know, it was my job to keep the characters looking the same, even though it had a great amount of change in the pencilers. And Frank was one of those guys. You know, he was one of those guys that came along that was, you know, Carmine Infantino, Gil Kane. He was part of that rostrum, I guess. And his pencils were very, very tight. You know, he was very young, he was very new, and I think he wanted to make a really good impression. So his pencils were incredibly, incredibly tight those first couple of issues. And you know the joke, you can pour ink on the top of the page and just kind of, you know, shimmy it around and the ink will pour down. It was that tight. It was like George Perez tight, you know, it was that tight. And that's how it really started. And he loosened up. He eventually went to breakdowns, and then he went to 8.5 by 11 drawings. He actually wrote the story on these 8.5 by 11 typewriter pieces of paper. He drew it, and he wrote the dialogue and the captions into it. It's kind of cool to see, actually, the you know what I was working from in that last year, maybe 14 months or something like that. But that's how we started.
So back then, were there things like exclusives, or did you just work for one company or another? Because you're doing most of your work for Marvel, right? Before you went to do Dark Knight, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that I very rarely worked for both companies at the same time. At least that's my memory of it, although there have been overlaps. I like to plant roots and dedicate myself, you know, to the company, and in that way, I'm a loyal soldier, I guess, for better or worse. But yeah, I was working pretty much exclusively for Marvel at the time. Listen, they were keeping me really busy because Daredevil wasn't the only book that I was inking. I was inking a lot of stuff that, you know, half the stuff I don't even remember at this point. It's been that much.
And then, did Frank make the leap, and then you left with him? How did that relationship begin?
He wanted to do Ronin. And I think DC just made him a better deal, or had, which I think is also possible, had a different format that he was interested in exploring, which at that time in the 80s was pretty important. And
was that Jeanette? Do you think? Like, was Jeanette, or like who is at the company that was like, yes? Do you remember?
You know, I don't know, because I never really had like a personal relationship with Jeanette. But I know that I remember distinctly, even before Dark Knight, that in my conversations with Dick Giordano, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, he was intent on doing something with Batman. He wanted to do something with Batman. And he wanted, I think almost as a reaction to the TV show, and maybe taking off from what Neil Adams had done a little bit. But he was also very focused on experimenting with formats. So I think that the square-bound book, which was novel at that time, the first time that had happened, was partly Dick's idea, partly Frank's idea. I'm not sure exactly, But Dick was really quite aggressive in his desire and his passion for experimenting.
Wow.
And Dick actually was the one that asked me to ink Dark Knight.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't Frank. I was, walking around the hallway, and Dick just came up to me and he said, Frank is going to be doing a Batman project, and he wants you to ink it. What do you say? It took me 10 seconds. And I said, sure, of course.
Right.
Knowing nothing,
Right.
about the project, I think probably my idea was, that it was just going to be a regular comic.